Madam Chair, I can confirm you are now live.
Great, thanks, Simon. Okay, I'm going to kick us off today. This is the call to order for the January 26th meeting of the Heritage Advisory Committee. We've got lots today in order. I'm going to let everybody know once again that I need to step off, although I think we'll be handing it over to other people potentially after we do our chair elections. So I think that is a sign for us to move to our first item here. Item 1.1, the election of chair and vice chair. Simon, can you remind me how we do this virtually?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can speak to this item. What will happen is I will take over as acting chair for the election of chair. At that point, I'll run us through the process of the election of chair. And following that process and the election of a chair, the new chair will take over the process and carry us through the same process again for the election of vice chair. So the process for the election of chair will go like this. I will open the floor to members to make nominations for the position of chair. Any member can nominate either themselves or another member for the position of chair. Any request for a nomination does require a seconder, but that's the only requirement. Following a call for nominations, we'll just determine how many we get. I will call 3 times for further nominations, and if at that point we have none, we'll carry on the either election or appointment. If we have at that time, following a close of nominations, 1 nomination for the position of chair, that member will be acclaimed. If we have multiple nominations on the floor, then we will begin an election. If members so desire, I have the ability to share a link that will give members the ability to vote by way of secret ballots via our online process. So we would be able to do that for either, if needed, the election of chair or vice chair. Are there any questions about the process as of this time? Hearing none. Oh, and I should mention as well, following the close of the nomination period, we will also need a motion just to close nominations, and I'll make sure that we do that. Sometimes we skirt over that, and it's just a little bit more formal if we do formally close nominations for our minute taker. So I will begin by opening the nominations for the position of chair. Is there anyone who would like to make a nomination as of this time? Is there anyone who would like to nominate either themselves or another member for the position of chair?
I will renominate myself if nobody else wants to nominate themselves. I'm happy to continue the job.
I'll second that.
Oh. Thank you. That's a nomination from moved by Jenny Lugar, seconded by Councillor Hensby to nominate Jenny Lugar to the position of chair of Harbour East, of Heritage Advisory Committee. I'm going to ask if there are any other nominations as of this time. Calling a second time for any further nominations for the position of chair, and a third and final time for nominations for the position of chair. Hearing none, could I have a motion to close the nomination period?
I will so move.
Thank you. That's moved by Lois York. Is there a seconder for that motion?
I can second that, Leslie.
Thanks. I can then say that I'm happy to announce that Jenny Lugar has been appointed chair of the Heritage Advisory Committee for 2022. Take it away, Jenny.
Okay, a big coup happening here, folks. Stay at the edge of your seat. Okay, so we're going to move on to the election of vice chair. The process is quite similar. I'm going to open the floor to any nominations for the vice chair of the Heritage Advisory Committee.
Hello.
Is there anybody who would like to nominate themselves or a colleague to be the vice chair of the committee? I promise it's not crazy duties. It's basically, if I can't do my job, then you do my job. Oh, one sec, there's chat things happening here. Oh, Patrick says he's happy to defer to new blood, but will continue if, okay, so I think that's Patrick nominating himself. Thank you, Patrick.
I'll second.
Thanks, Leslie. Is there anybody else who would like to nominate themselves or somebody else for the position of vice chair? I'll ask a second time. Anybody else would like to nominate themselves or someone else as vice chair? And a third. Anybody else who would like to nominate somebody as the vice chair? Okay, looks like we have two existing members by acclaim. So I think that Simon, what we did was just move on to a motion to close the election of vice chair.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Stoddard. You first. Second it.
I was going to say I so move if you want to close the nominations.
Okay, I think probably I'm supposed to say, okay, Patrick Connor is elected to the position of vice chair for the HAC, and now go ahead, Councillor Stoddard.
I'd like to close the nominations.
Thank you. And the seconder, please.
I'll second that, Lois.
Thank you, Lois. Okay, so that means we are going to have to nominate Patrick, based on, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in the chat here, but based on your current technology situation, I think we're going to probably have to nominate a interim chair for the day for once I leave at around 3:30 here. So tell me if I'm wrong, Patrick. Keep an eye on the chat here. I'm out of it as far as technology goes. Okay, so Simon, is it appropriate to vote on a vice chair or not a vice chair, sorry, an interim chair for the day?
Yep, that's correct, Madam Chair. We can certainly do that. Just appoint an acting for this motion. It would just need a simple motion to do so.
Sure. Okay. Is there anybody who would like to volunteer to chair the meeting for today following 3:30, or well, probably following the first item, because I'm going to hop off at that point? Anybody want to volunteer? I'm going to volunteer somebody if somebody doesn't volunteer.
I'll step in as temporary chair in regards to the remainder of the meeting when you have to leave.
Perfect. That would be great. It would just be, I think we'll probably be able to get through we'll be able to get through what we get through, and I'll let you know when I've got to go, sort of thing. Okay, so can I have
I'll second that. I'll second that.
Okay, so oh, sorry, there's just hands going up all over the place here. Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so Councillor Hensby is going to be the interim chair for the rest of this meeting after I duck off at about 3:30 p.m. today. Okay, let's move along with our meeting here. So our second order of business, rather, is the approval of the minutes from our November 10th, 2022 meeting. Those minutes were in the attached in the package that was sent to the committee. Does anyone have any edits or anything that they would like to address in those minutes? Councillor, go right ahead. Oh, I think you're on mute, Councillor Stoddard.
And it's not the minutes themselves, it's the date, November 10th. It should be 2021.
Sorry, that's an oversight on my part as part of the drafting of the agenda.
Oh, no problem at all. Just thought I'd point it out.
That is a good point. I feel like I've already transitioned into 2022. It happened a little bit more quickly this year. Okay, so Simon, that's an error that's specifically in our agenda, not in the actual minutes then. Yeah. So, okay, well, without any other changes or additions or deletions to the minutes, I'll take a movement to approve those minutes?
I'll move to approve the minutes. David?
Thanks, David. A seconder, please.
Cassandra, I'll second it.
Thanks, Cassandra. Okay. Next item here is approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions.
If we can just call the question on the last
sorry.
item just briefly, no trouble.
Sorry, I need to pull up my one that has annotations here that tells me when to call a question. All those in favor of approving the minutes from the November 10th, 2021 meeting, please, I guess, unmute and or put in the chat, depending on what your technology capabilities are right now. All those in favor, sorry.
Aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded? Okay, motion carries, the minutes are approved. Approval of the order of business and additions and approval of additions and deletions. Simon, I don't believe that there was anything added or deleted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yep, nothing added or deleted for this meeting.
Okay, I will take a motion for that approval of the order of business then, please.
I so move. Lois.
Thank you, Lois.
I'll second. Counselor Stoddard?
Thank you, Counselor. I think, well, we'll just call a vote anyway. All those in favor?
Aye.
Say aye.
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 Thank you. Contrary minded? Okay, great. That also carries. Business arising out of the minutes. There was none from our last meeting. Call for declaration of conflict of interest. So based on the reports and discussion that are on our agenda today, would anybody like to declare a conflict of interest? I'll ask once more. Anybody want to declare a conflict of interest today? No? Okay, no problem. Consideration of deferred business, there is none. Correspondence, petitions, and delegations. I believe that there are none here. Information items brought forward, also none. And so that gets us into item 9, which are our reports and discussion. So there is one coming from staff specifically, which is the proposed 2022 Heritage Advisory Committee meeting schedule. So if everyone could open that up. For those of you who have not, well, actually, I guess everybody was on the committee at this time last year, but basically for those of you who have not been on the committee before, we like to take a look at our schedule and see if there's any conflicts just right off the bat and any dates that people might like to shift around. And knowing that they may still shift based on, different things that happen throughout the year, but we like to kind of set our schedule and do our best to hit those dates. Simon, anything to add to that?
Just one note that the location is listed as Halifax Hall, second floor, City Hall. That's our ordinary in-person meeting location. We're currently direction from the clerk's office is to hold virtual meetings as of the COVID-19 pandemic's current wave. We're continuing to schedule virtual meetings. However, when and should things change, we will, of course, communicate through the chair to the committee, and we'll discuss options in terms of what the appetite is in terms of in-person versus virtual meetings and formats and so on and so forth. Otherwise, can just say that these dates are, of course, always subject to change based on direction from the chair. In combination with discussion from staff, chair has direction for setting meetings and rescheduling as needed. Otherwise, this is just to provide a little bit of scheduling clarity and assist in terms of create some standards for the year.
Great, thanks, Simon. Does anybody have any thoughts, issues, anything that they might like to suggest for our meeting dates that are scheduled for the year?
I'll just say an appreciation for not scheduling one in December.
Yes. December, well, what day would it be then? December 27th, not exactly a fun day to meet as the Heritage Advisory Committee. And of course, our summer ones are always, as needed. We often do have a July meeting, but then we often do not have an August meeting. So That's just lots of vacations and stuff.
The only comment I have, Madam Chair, is June 22nd. I'm not sure what the graduation schedule is going to be for high schools and stuff. I usually try to attend those, but we don't even know what the pandemic requirements are going to be at that particular time in 5 months' time. So that could be a possible conflict for graduation dates.
Sure. Why don't we post? Let's kind of make a note of that, Simon, and then let's see when we're closer to that date if it makes sense to move it a week earlier or a week later, whichever makes sense. Is that okay, Councillor Hensby? Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. Hopefully, then we'll have a little more clarity on what's going on with the high schools. Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts on the agenda? Not the agenda. Sorry, the schedule for the year. Okay, in that case, I think we can, there's a motion here. If somebody would like to read that off of the agenda and put it on the floor.
If you wish, Madam Chair, that the motion is Heritage Advisory Committee approve the proposed 2022 meeting schedules outlined in the staff memorandum.
I will second that. Lois.
Thank you, Lois. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Contrary minded? Okay, that motion carries. I think at this point, Councillor Hensby, if it's okay with you, I may hand it over for the next item, item 9.1.2 on the agenda, just because I feel as though we're not going to get through that in 7 minutes, and making the transition halfway through a staff presentation might be a little bit more uncomfortable. So maybe I'll let you introduce this item and let you get staff on board to start the presentation, and I'll just hop off when I need to. Simon, is there anything more formal we need to do to hand this off to Councillor Hensby?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just jogging my memory. We did have a motion just to appoint an acting chair, correct? Just during the, yep, okay. Yep, then we are all good. Whenever you would like, we can go ahead and switch off.
Perfect. Okay, I will switch it. I'll hand it over to you, Councillor Hensby.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I hope you enjoyed part of the presentation. Let's go forward now on item number 9.1.2, case number H00485. The request to include 2267 Brunswick Street in Halifax in the Registry of Heritage Properties for the Halifax Regional Municipality. For some of those who are on committee, you might be quite familiar with this particular piece of property, the Glebe House for St. Patrick's Church. So we'll have staff come forward and make a presentation, and then we'll go into the consideration of business on the rating of the heritage value. So I'll have staff come forward, please.
Would you like me to put this on the floor?
Well, let's yeah, I'll put it on the floor first. Okay, go ahead there, Councillor, and we'll put it on the floor, and then we'll have the staff presentation.
I motion that the Heritage Advisory Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council, 1, set a date for a heritage hearing, to consider the inclusion of the subject property in the Registry of Heritage Properties for their Halifax Regional Municipality, and 2, approve the request to include 2267 Brunswick Street, Halifax, in the Registry of Heritage Properties for the Halifax Regional Municipality, as shown on map 1 of the December 22nd, 2021 report, as a municipal heritage property under the Heritage Property Act. I so move.
I guess we'll take a quick second there, but just to say it might be a little premature to put the motion on the floor since we haven't approved the rating yet. So I guess we could, the motion's on the floor now. I'll have it duly seconded, then we'll go to the staff presentation. This motion is also predicated if it passes the threshold of heritage status rating. So just to let everybody know that. So I'll take a second for the motion, then we'll get into the staff presentation. If it does not meet the criteria, then we'll have to take a motion to have the motion rescinded. Okay. So I'll take a seconder just to have it on the record, and then we'll just move forward with the presentation.
I'll second it. Lois.
Thank you very much. So we'll have now the presentation by staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just wait one moment here while I believe Simon's going to share the presentation for me.
I believe my colleague Jill is just prepping that presentation at the moment, but just bear with us.
Sure, no problem. Okay, great. So thank you, Jill, for sharing that. So as mentioned, this is the heritage registration hearing for case 485 or the property at 2267 Brunswick Street. So this application is before us because it was passed at a regional council meeting back in December of 2019 to explore the potential of registering this property. There was some reasons for the delay, which we'll get to here shortly in one of the slides, but this particular registration request, it's interesting given that if approved, it would actually be the second time that this property was a registered heritage property. So moving on to the next slide. So yeah, this slide gives some context to the subject site, which you can see here on the left in red. This general area has several properties that are municipally registered, as you can see by the hash marks there. One of those is, of course, the round church at 22 Brunswick Street at the corner of the Brunswick and Cornwallis intersection, and also the abutting property that you'll see here on the next slide. So this subject property contains a 3-story building, which, as Mr. Chair mentioned, is known as the St. Patrick's Glebe or the St. Patrick's Rectory. It was designed in the late Victorian Eclectic style, and it was constructed in 1888. Next slide, please. So this slide gives some background to the subject property's history. As noted, it was actually a registered heritage property back in January of 1982, which was a mistaken registration due to a civic addressing error. So at the time, the former city of Halifax was processing a registration application for the abutting property, the St. Patrick's Church. It was successfully registered. However, the incorrect address was erroneously registered. So many years later, in 2015, the church requested to deregister the subject property to help facilitate its sale. A portion of those funds may have been were used to help do some repairs to the St. Patrick's Church. So the subject site was successfully deregistered, and St. Patrick's Church was ultimately registered as intended. Next slide, please. And just as a little bit more background, so the current property owner completed some rehabilitation efforts to the property back in 2016. So this slide shows what it looked like before those efforts. The property was then converted from an institutional building to a multi-unit residential dwelling as well. So there's actually a development agreement approved for this property back in 2019. The development agreement permits a second detached residential building to the rear of this. It's an 8-story building that would in no way impact or alter this dwelling. Regional Council's decision to approve the development agreement was subsequently appealed unsuccessfully. So once the appeal and the legal issues were resolved this past summer, and staff started to process this registration application in more detail. So next slide, please. This shows, of course, the registration evaluation criteria, which most of you are familiar with at this point in time. So there's 6 criteria. Each has a maximum score for a total cumulative value of 100 points. And if the committee today gives a score of 50 or more points, the application moves forward to regional council with a positive recommendation. If that threshold isn't met, then the registration application is finalized and not registered. So moving on to the next slide, we'll start going through each of the criteria kind of one by one, and then we'll pause for the committee score. So this subject property shares a property boundary with, of course, the St. Patrick's Roman Catholic Church. The church was constructed in 1883 to 1885 to serve the growing Catholic community in North End Halifax. This property, as shown on the Goats Fire Insurance Plan, was constructed in 1889 to help with these efforts to support the local Catholic population. So moving on to the next slide, we do know that this property was constructed in 1889, and as such, staff recommend a score of 13 points for age.
Are there any questions on the age of the building? It's pretty basic, I guess. So 13 points has been allocated. So I guess everyone's in favor of the 13 points for that.
Don't think there's any dispute there, Counselor.
Okay. Do I assume I have consensus from everyone?
Yes.
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 Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next category, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this property has both historical and architectural importance, but the staff report and the presentation here today will focus on the historical importance, which is largely associated with Halifax's Irish Catholic population, and of course the St. Patrick's Catholic Church. So in the 1800s, Halifax had Canada's the largest naval base. And at the same time, there was also a large influx of Irish Catholics to Halifax. So during that time, many of these Irish Catholics, newcomers, were recruited into the British Army. And partially due to this and also their enterprising spirit, their Irish institutions really started to thrive, particularly in this area, the North End. So the map here on the right, the dark color shows the former district, which included the subject site. And then during a portion of the late 1800s, this was actually the largest concentration of Irish Catholics in the city of Halifax at the time. Moving on to the next slide, you'll see part 2 of historical importance, which is, of course, connected to St. Patrick's Church, which was originally founded in 1843. The rectory was constructed as continuing efforts to better serve the population during the peak of the Irish influence. At the time, there was an extensive network of services along the street, including St. Patrick Boys and also Girls' School. So once constructed, the building had some space for convents, classrooms, social services, interfaith marriages, and Catholic marriages. And there was also some space for an orphanage. There's a few other points worth noting here. So the rectory building was at one point the home of Edward Joseph McCarthy and James Hayes, who became the Archbishops of Halifax. And the site was also an important relief station after the Halifax explosion. So on the next slide, you'll see staff's recommendations. So due to the role of this property and building have had in the history of Halifax, specifically amongst the Irish Catholic community, staff would recommend a score between 11 or 15 points for historical.
Thank you very much, Jesse. Do I have a recommendation from anyone for scoring it between 11 and 15? We welcome any suggestions, please.
It's Cassandra. I would suggest 14 or 15. I think there's a lot of different elements here, and pushing, a starting point of almost 200 years, 180 years. So higher end of that.
Mr. Chair, I'd probably want to go a little bit higher because it has a lot, the religious history, the building history, what happened in the building. I think it might go a little bit higher than 16. I'm not sure how the rest of the committee would feel.
The highest score in this category would be 15. So, roll is.
Sorry about that.
All right. So you're recommending a 15. I see some other people in the chat also suggesting 15 as well. So Can we get concurrence on a 15 score on this particular building?
I concur.
I concur.
I concur.
I concur.
I do
Okay,
too.
15 it is. All right, we'll go to the next category, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just in terms of the councilor's questions there, so a higher score is possible, but only when the property has connections to national significance, whereas this property's significance is really tied to the Halifax or the provincial scale, hence why it tops out at the 15 points.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Sure. So yeah, the next scoring criteria is the architect or builder. So the building was constructed and designed by Henry Peters, who is a well-known architect in Nova Scotia. So he founded Peters, Blakelock and Peters with his brother Simon and also George Blakelock. The company was primarily a building company. They also operated a woodworking factory. So they did help construct several notable buildings in Halifax, including the Wellington Barracks and St. Matthew's Church on Barrington Street in South End, Halifax. Though Mr. Peters did also design some buildings as well. So after the firm dissolved, he did form a working relationship with our architect David Sterling on several buildings. So Peters did construct Sterling's building, the Intercolonial Railway Station, which is pictured here on the left. This building was once located at the North and Barrington Street intersection, but unfortunately was destroyed during the Halifax explosion. Peters did design and build many other notable buildings, including the Union Bank and the Benjamin Weir House. So moving on to the next slide, we've spoken a little bit about Benjamin Weir in recent months. He's a controversial and probably problematic figure for many reasons. But the house here that was built by Mr. Peters is quite impressive architecturally, regardless of who owned the property at the time. So given that Mr. Peters was a provincially significant architect, staff would recommend a score between 4 and 6 points.
Thank you very much, Jesse. You see from the pictures that you see quite remarkable similar design and design. So it's very, very, very compatible. Very consistent. So I have any recommendations on scoring here from anyone, please? Any suggestions?
Jesse, it's Lois. I'm wondering, very fine architect, and his work is known all over the city, but what about outside the city? Are the buildings that we know of constructed by Peters?
Right, so through you, Mr. Chair, so based on the research that we did and our researcher did, it looks like Mr. Peters was well known throughout the province. I believe he did do some designs and construction outside of Halifax. I just can't tell you at this particular time exactly what those were, but it is worth noting that the majority of his construction, at least based on the research that we did, is within Halifax, if that helps.
Thank you, it does. And Chairman, I would then support a 6 for Mr. Peters, the architect.
I hear a recommendation of 6. Does everyone concur or differ with that analysis? I see 6 from Patrick Connor is suggesting. Any other suggestions from anyone, or do we have concurrence on a 6 score?
I'm good with 6. This is Jennifer.
Thank you, Jen. Anyone else?
I agree with 6. It's Luke.
Thank you, Luke. Anyone else?
I agree with 6 as well, David.
Thanks, Dave. I see Cassandra's also said 6 in the chat line. Okay. I believe we have consensus on a 6 score. Okay. So next category, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So next we're moving on to architectural merit, first looking at construction. So this is a wood frame building, 3 stories in height, that was finished with a red brick exterior. So the exact construction type is unknown, as staff didn't have the opportunity to do an extensive or intensive inspection of the property. Based on its age, it's possible that it could either be a late example of a timber frame construction or a mid to late example of balloon framing construction. But either way, both of these styles were quite common at the time. That being said, it does feature some impressive exterior detailing, which you can see pictured here on a recent photo. So that on the next slide, you'll see staff's recommendation. So this particular construction type, all evidence suggests that it was fairly common, as were brick-clad institutional buildings at the time. However, now we do know that there are much fewer brick-clad institutional buildings from the 1800s in the area. So staff have landed on a recommendation between 4 and 6 points for construction type.
Thank you very much, Jess. Do I have any recommendations on the architectural merit between a score of 4 or 6? 4, 5, or 6? What do I hear from anyone?
It's Jennifer. I would be inclined to put it closer to put it to 6. It's especially if it has balloon construction, because I don't think there's a whole lot of that left around right now. So anyway, I would definitely support a 6.
Do I have anyone differing from Jennifer's opinion on that? The Dr. Digdon is agreeing with that score.
I would agree. Iona.
Thank you, Counselor. And I see Marissa is also, and Patrick also says 6. Okay, so I guess 6 it is on architectural merit. Next category, please.
And thank you. So yeah, moving on to architectural style. So the building was designed in the late Victorian eclectic style, which was common in Nova Scotia between 1880 and 1915. So this would be an early to mid example of the style. And really this style just incorporates a variety of different Victorian architectural influences into a single product. So you can see there's Gothic revival influences here from the arch windows. The Second Empire influences are seen from the characteristic mansard roof. And there's also some Italianate detailing, which you can see in the large eaves or the bracketed cornices. There are some other character defining elements on the property, including its asymmetrical 4-bay facade, which is not original, but has become character defining over time. We'll speak about that a little bit in the integrity section. There's also granite plinth at the base of the building, along with a stone and brick foundation. There's an interesting brick string course with sawtooth brick designs between the first and second story along the facade. And there's also some unique slender 1/1 pointed arch windows that have decorative voussoirs above and granite sills below. So moving on to the next slide, you can see a closer up view of those windows along with some of the characteristic roof dormers there, which have a Gothic influence. So this building is quite unique and it's an early example of the style. So staff would recommend a score between 7 and 10 points for architectural style.
Thank you very much, Jesse. I was kind of wondering about how looks like the south end of the building was an annex sort of added on. It just has a little different tone of brick and stuff, and it takes away from the symmetry of the first 3 sections. So it did look like a bit of an add-on to the building later on. All right, so do we have any scores on this particular architectural merit for style? I see between 7 and 10. Does anybody have any recommendations that they'd like to suggest?
It's Jennifer again. Being a born and bred Haligonian, I always felt like this was one of those places that when you walked past it and saw it, you knew that it had importance, and it has, its defining character has remained in all those years. So I would be, having said that, I would be very comfortable actually scoring it at its highest at a 10. I think it has a very defining look to it.
We have a suggestion of 10 from Jennifer Clark-Hines, or any other scores anybody likes to suggest, or they concur with the score of 10.
I think that was well said, Jennifer. It's Cassandra, and I would concur with 10.
And I would too. It's Lois.
And I as well as Cecily.
I agree with that as well. This is Luke.
I agree, Iona.
I agree, Marisha.
I agree as well, David.
So we'll settle on a score of 10 by everyone's recommendation. So we'll go on to the next category.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So this is architectural integrity. So this is a view of the property from 2013. We've seen some new pictures of the building before, and we will on the next slide as well. But you can see that the building still has very good integrity. So most of its defining features remain intact. So as Mr. Chair mentioned, the property does have an addition on the front of the building. So on the right-hand corner here. So a lot of Gothic buildings originally had an L-shaped floor plan, which this one did as well, but there was an addition in 1936 to create the current rectangular form. And you can see that the brick shading there is slightly lighter than the original building. So that's kind of an interesting feature on the property. There were some other alterations to this building as well. So the chimneys were removed over time. The rear wall was modified, and a lot of architectural detailing is lost. However, these changes aren't really doable from the public right of way. The entrance
I'm on mute.
here was modified as
Zoom,
well
I'm on mute.
over time.
No, you're not.
And also the wood windows were placed over time between 2012 and 2016. So there were some alterations that occurred to the property. And again,
what was the front porch removed? I see this is an old picture of the old wood.
Yeah, so
porch.
moving on to the next slide, if you can there, Jill. So this will show a comparison kind of side by side. The recent photo on the right, over an 8 to 9 year span, you can see it on the left. So when the new owner was doing their exterior restoration, it changed from being kind of a brick entryway to a more modern kind of glass entryway, which you can see there. And I should also mention, again, the development agreement that's for the property. That development agreement won't create any alterations on this property. That simply permits a larger building, standalone building to the rear of this property. So on the next slide, you'll see that there have been some modest changes to the property, but still overall its integrity is largely intact. So staff would recommend a score between 6 and 10 points because there have been some modest changes over time.
I like trees, but I don't know why you planted them so close to the building. I would have put them closer to the right of way of the road. But anyway, that picture that you showed with the trees on it just seems to take away from the streetscape of the building. You can just, that's my architectural street landscaping opinion on that. But we have recommendations between modest changes between 6 and 10. Do we have any scores from anyone? Any suggested scores from anybody?
It's Jennifer. I just wanted clarification. The picture that we're looking at right now actually isn't the way it looks. It has a glass in front, correct?
Yes, this is the old picture, and you'll see the new one has how they painted the brickwork above the windows have been painted black instead of appearing white and stuff. And you'll see the changes in the front doorstep. Yes.
Okay. Okay. In my opinion, the 2013 one, I would give it like full points, but because it has changed a bit, and I'm really not loving the glass in the front, I would give it, and actually I can't see it. What's the range, Jesse, between 6 and 10?
Yes, staff's recommendation would
be
be 6 to 10 because there are modest changes, but again,
I would probably give it a 9, just because if we were going from the 2013, I would give it a 10, but I think personally I would dock it just a little bit because of that.
I see also that Patrick is suggesting a 9 as well because of the loss of the brick porch and the glass enclosure. So I see someone else also concurs with the score of 9. Is anyone else that differ from that score? Do I have concurrence on a score of 9 for modest changes?
Yes.
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 Yep.
Okay, great.
Now relationship to the surrounding.
Yeah, so this is the final scoring category. So the property does have very strong connections to the abutting property, which features St. Patrick's Catholic Church, both historically and architecturally. So both of these buildings were constructed by the same individual, Mr. Peters, and they were also designed to complement each other. Over time, this building has become a fixture of the Brunswick streetscape and also the North End suburb, which does feature a variety of architectural buildings from the 1800s and many properties which have since been registered. Staff should also note that this area is particularly important because it was also identified as a potential heritage conservation district through the Regional Center secondary plan exercise. So staff will be looking at this area somewhere down the road as a potential conservation district. So finally, the next slide shows staff's recommendation, which is between 6 and 10 points due to the strong relationship to the surrounding area.
Do I have any suggestions on the relationship to surroundings to the neighborhood between a score of 6 and 10? Personally, I feel it's a piece of the monopoly board of the street, and I would call it. I would think a 10 would be, in my opinion, appropriate. But I see Patrick Connor is also suggesting 10. Does anyone else like to suggest a score?
I would support a 10.
Mr. Chair, I would support a 10 as well. Iona.
Thank you. That was David and Iona.
I would
I
also
support a 10.
That was Jennifer and Luke. Thank you.
And I as well as Leslie.
Doctor, thank you.
Marisha, and I'll add the in as well.
10 as well.
And
Okay.
And
Lois
Cassandra.
as well.
And Lois, thanks. So I think 10 out of 10 on that one. So if I have my calculations right, I believe we scored a 69 on that particular property. So therefore, I believe it merits registration. Now, my question to staff is that this is a bit of a controversial property. It was registered in error because of civic address issues. Then it got deregistered and sold, and now the property owner knows it's going through a heritage registration. So you'll be allowed to speak to this when it goes back to
Hi, Chris,
council.
how you doing? Good, good. I'm sorry, I'm also on.
So I believe that so when this goes back to council, the property owner will be allowed to speak on it. Has he given us any indication of his opinion on this registration process?
So through you, Mr. Chair, so we've been in contact with the property owner over the last couple of years since council's motion came down. So he is aware of this application to register the property. So again, this registration, he already has a development agreement for the property, which would allow him to construct a standalone building. It's our understanding that he also has permits to proceed with that if he sees fit. So the registration won't impact that development at this time. It could have some future implications for what changes within the standalone rectory building. But generally speaking, he's up to date on the process, and he will have the opportunity to participate in the heritage hearing once regional council sets a date for that.
Now, I believe that part of the appeal of the development agreement he has is that he was restricted to the height of the building to the roof line of the church. Now, with this registration of a heritage property, will he have an opportunity for extra density bonusing in regards to, I thought there was some allowances for heritage properties to have some density incentives. So I'm just kind of curious, so does this open the door for him to try for another floor on the design or not?
Right, so if it is registered, the regional center secondary planning strategy does have a policy in place that allows a municipally registered property owner to request a heritage DA to get uses that are otherwise not permitted, provided that they give some significant preservation efforts kind of in exchange for that. So it's a policy that does allow additional development rights, provided that there's a lot of investment in heritage preservation as well. So I can't tell you if the property owner will or won't use that in the future, but it is something that's there that they could seek if it came. But right now they do have permits for the 8-story building in the rear yard, which could happen either with or without the registration.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions from members of the committee? I don't see anyone wanting to make any comments, so I'll ask for, we'll vote on the motion now. All those in favor of the motion has already been read into the record. May I ask someone to say aye to the motion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 And I see Patrick's also indicated he's in favor as well. Anyone opposed to the motion? Hearing none, it's unanimous that this be recommendation go forward to regional council. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next agenda item. Case number agenda item 9.1.3 is case H00519, substantial alteration to the contributing heritage resource at 1266 Barrington Street in Halifax. I believe everyone knows this is the Waverly Inn. So everybody will have a presentation on this first, I guess. We'll have the presentation first and see how it goes. Then we'll have the recommendation go on the floor. Is that all right? Is that with you there, Leslie? I mean, Jesse?
Sure, that's fine with me. Thanks for pulling up that presentation. As Mr. Chair mentioned, this is Heritage Case 519 for the property at 1266 Barrington Street. So this is a substantial alteration request to a contributing heritage resource within the Old South Suburb Heritage Conservation District. So this is the first substantial alteration within this district that the Heritage Advisory Committee will have the opportunity to review. So next slide, please. This slide just gives a little bit of background on the application. So it was submitted by ZAP Consulting Incorporated on behalf of the property owner Sterling Inn Limited. Again, the location is South End Halifax at 1266 Barrington Street. It was identified as a contributing heritage resource within the Old South Suburb Heritage Conservation District. It's, as Mr. Chair mentioned, it's better known as the Waverly Inn property, which is the building is pictured here on the right. So the proposal before you today is a request to substantially alter the subject property by rehabilitating the original inn structure or the portion of the building closest to Barrington Street, and then constructing a 10-story rear yard addition to the original inn structure. So this request, it's a very significant and complex request, and it actually involves two concurrent applications: the substantial alteration, which is before the committee today, then a concurrent site plan approval application, which is proceeding through the appropriate channels concurrently at this time. So next slide, please. So as mentioned, the Old South Suburb Heritage Conservation District is HRM's newest Heritage Conservation District. So the boundaries of this area relate to Halifax's first original suburb, which occurred in this area, as pictured here on the right, to the south of the original fortified city. So the district's heritage value is associated primarily with two factors, the first being the early settlement of Nova Scotia, and also its strong concentration of architecture from the late Georgian and Victorian eras, and also the unique classical detailing that is associated with these architectural styles. So the district plan and bylaw identify contributing heritage resources. So these are the properties or buildings within the district that provide the most heritage value and are of the utmost importance when it comes to reviewing changes to these properties. So there's special policies and regulations that guide changes to contributing heritage resources. So this application is a bit more request than this, a bit more in-depth request, and there's more moving parts than your standard substantial alteration, but there are lots of features in place to help protect these contributing heritage resources. So part of the trade-off that was made in creating with this plan and bylaw is there's increased focus on protecting these key elements. There's also the understanding that there will be opportunities for more modern and dense development in other sites of the district, or also to the rear of some of these contributing heritage resources. Next slide, please. This slide provides some context to the surrounding area. Of course, the subject site is shown here in red, and it contains the 2.5-story Waverly Inn. So the area is really defined by historic residential buildings, which are typically 2 to 3 stories in height, and some of which have since been converted to mixed-use buildings, so commercial uses on the ground floor and then residential uses above. The largest clusters of the Georgian and Victorian architecture are seen kind of at the midpoint of the image and also at the extremities. You can also see that there's some denser modern development interspersed throughout the district. Next slide, please. So this slide gives an alternate view of the site, this time looking south. Across the street on Barrington Street, you'll see 5 low-density buildings, and these are 5 other contributing heritage resources. There are also contributing heritage resources abutting the northern property line or to the bottom of the red square in this image. The subject site also abuts 2 properties with 6 or 7-story mid-rise buildings, which you can see here. Next slide, please. This slide gives a bit of context to the property. So the existing building was constructed in the Italianate style in 1850 and 1890. It was originally built as a dwelling for Edward W. Chipman, was a dry goods merchant in Halifax, and the dwelling was constructed between 1865 and 1866. So Sarah and Jane Romans eventually purchased the property about 10 years later and converted the building to an inn. They also constructed an addition, a rear wing, which you can see partially here in this image. So another part of the property's heritage value is attributed to the guests that stayed at the inn, including many business people, politicians, and also Oscar Wilde, who stayed there. Next slide, please. So this provides a more recent view of the property, this time from 2019. Here you can see the rear wing in context with the front facade. So the rear wing was really a functional utilitarian construction that was designed to expand the hotel capacity. The detailing of this ring really differ from the larger heritage district and also the facade of this building. Over time, there were a few features that were removed, including a rooftop structure and some bay window copper roofs on the facade. On the southern wall, you can also see that some detailing, particularly along the breakfast nook, has been lost. But overall, this building and its character-defining elements are still reasonably intact, hence why it was identified as a contributing heritage resource. Next slide, please.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering what the slides are not seem to be moving. Oh. Okay.
Okay, one more slide, please. Right, so this slide focuses in on the applicant proposal. So it's an ambitious proposal, which involves a lot of moving parts here. So in short, the applicant is proposing to remove the Waverly Inn's rear wing and rehabilitate the original structure and many of its key character-defining elements, which you can see along the facade. The applicant will then be constructing a 10-story addition to the rear of the original Waverly Inn structure, which is the part of the building that abuts Barrington Street. So the proposal will increase the inn's capacity from about 14 to 117 rooms, and it will also provide some indoor parking space to guests. So as mentioned, the concurrent application, the site plan approval application, which has been identified as case 21380, has advanced to the final stages of that application. It's been ongoing for over the past year. This site plan approval application includes an assessment of the Halifax Design Manual, which does include some urban design guidelines and also heritage guidelines. So HRM staff and the applicant have been working on this application for quite some time now, and the applicant has made some key revisions to the proposal, which staff believe meets the appropriate design guidelines. Next slide, please. And there we go. So this shows the site plan of the site. You can see the original Waverly Inn building is identified in a dark gray color. The current wing is shown by a red hash line. The orange parts on the site plan really reflect the large significant mass of the new addition. There is a white area between the two structures, which is a low-lying connector that will integrate the historic structure with a more modern non-combustible structure. So the addition is primarily located in the rear yard, but you can see along the southern boundary line, there is a portion that does extend into the southern yard a bit, and this is to provide some access to the indoor parking space. A few key features to notice here are that the parking entrance will be located a minimum of 6 meters from the street line and 3.9 meters from the breakfast nook along the southern wall. And then when you move vertically above the nook, the setbacks increase to 5.8 meters to provide some separation between the contributing heritage resource, Waverly Inn, and the new construction. Next slide, please. So this view gives you an indication of what the proposal will look like from the Barrington streetscape. You can see that the Balkan mass of the proposed addition are pushed away to the rear of the site, away from the contributing heritage resource. The proposed height, you can see, is fairly comparable to the height of the abutting structure pictured here on the left. It's also reasonably compatible with the height of the multi-unit residential building to the property's rear. So the addition was also designed to ensure that the Waverly Inn remains the focal point of the site, particularly to pedestrians and vehicles moving along the grade. Staff note that this is a complex proposal. There are also some elements of this proposal which include minor alterations and repairs which aren't subject to the committee's review or regional council's approval. So there are a number of things here, features that staff can approve independently of today's meeting. Some of these things include basic painting and general repairs. There's also the reinstatement of the original paired and column entryways that you can see on the midpoint of the building, and also the removal of the Waverly Inn's rear wing. Next slide, please. So this slide provides a reminder of some of the key definitions within the Heritage Property Act and the focal point of today, which are the substantial alterations that are proposed to this property. So substantial alteration is any action that affects or alters the character defining elements of a property. And the character defining elements can really be a range of things. It includes the materials, forms, configurations, uses, and cultural associations that contribute to a property's heritage value. And these are the features that must be sustained in order to preserve a property's heritage value moving forward. So moving on to the next slide, we'll start an overview of the 4 key components of the applicant's substantial alteration request. The first is, of course, the most significant piece, the 10-story addition. So this image shows the massing of the proposed addition as seen from the connections points to the rear part of the Waverly Inn. So you can see that the large mass, again, is pushed away from the rear part of the original Waverly Inn structure. It is connected with a more minute 1-story connection to the rear of the property. So the connection point does connect primarily to the rear of the building, but again, it does extend into the southern portion of the building. So this addition does not disrupt character defining elements directly. It does have some minor impacts on the southern breakfast nook, which we will talk about in a bit more detail in subsequent slides. Next slide, please. This slide shows a second view from the southern property line. You can see the massing of the proposed addition, including the 3-story parking garage entrance as it would look from the southern lot line. You can also see some blue hash lines, which reflect the profile of the existing building on the abutting site. So this slide really helps convey the visual impacts that the existing building has on the Waverly Inn and some of those that will be occurring if the applicant's proposal is approved. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the rear elevation. So the rear wing would have been removed here. So thus there will be some architectural detailing that is added to the rear wall. This detailing staff feel is reasonably consistent with the historic place and its original construction period. There are also some features such as a fire escape here that will be required through the National Building Code because there will be modern development here happening. Next slide, please. So finally, we have another image of the 10-story addition, which shows its view from the street. The addition really focuses on using a contemporary design with modern building materials, including glass panels, ceramic cladding, and metal cladding. In doing so, the addition provides a generally uniform appearance, which helps make the Waverly Inn the focal point of the proposal. And these materials also help ensure subordination in that there is sufficient contrast between the new addition and the Waverly building. The proposal does also introduce some historic materials to help add some compatibility with the historic structure. In this particular case, some copper cladding, which will be located on the roof and the front facade's bay windows. Next slide, please. So the second key substantial alteration is the reinstatement of a rooftop structure. So historical documents show that there was a rooftop structure here, either a belvedere or a cupola. However, there's not a lot of documentation to show exactly what this structure looks like. So this isn't a total restoration because there is limited historical documentation, but staff feel that this aspect of the proposal is generally consistent with the historic place. Next slide, please. As noted, the applicant will be introducing some additional detailing on the southern wall, particularly on the breakfast nook, which has been lost over time. So the image on the left from 1940 shows some of the architectural detailing that was in place. The applicant is proposing to reinstate a portion of this detailing. However, again, this isn't a true restoration because we do know that some of the detailing and materials will differ from the original construction period. Because there are some differences, it is subject to the HAC's review today. Next slide, please. The final alteration which needs to be discussed is the introduction of some modern building materials. So this is a project that integrates a modern non-combustible structure with a historic wood structure. And as such, there are going to be some building code issues that come into play here. So the applicant does prefer to use wood windows and wood siding throughout the proposal. However, it's possible that the National Building Code is going to require some modern materials, such as aluminum windows, non-combustible siding, and some exterior sprinkles along the southern wall, just because it is in close proximity to the abutting property line and where a portion of the new development will be integrated or physically connected to the building. So while it would definitely be preferable from a heritage point of view if modern materials could be used throughout, we do have to acknowledge that building and safety issues do take precedent in situations where there will be integrated development occurring. Next slide, please. So typically when there's a substantial alteration application in for a registered property, staff do one review looking at the impacts on the building or property's character defining elements. But because this is within the Old South Suburb Heritage Conservation District, staff have to do an evaluation of both the impacts on the district as a whole and specifically impacts on the existing contributing heritage resource. So this slide will focus on the overall impacts on the Heritage Conservation District. So after doing an assessment, staff feel that there are little to no impacts on the Heritage Conservation District's overall heritage value. The district's value or character defining elements are primarily associated with Georgian or Victorian architecture and the related detailing. So this proposal will help preserve the Heritage Conservation District's character defining elements because the front or original portion of the Waverly Inn structure will be maintained. So it is this front facade that contains the Italianate features, which will either be repaired or replaced or rehabilitated with historic photos where necessary. So this is good from a heritage point of view because not only will the key architectural elements be preserved, but the historic in use of the property will continue well into the future as well, which is desirable from from a heritage point of view and the HCD plan. Staff also know that there are sensitive design elements in the new addition that do limit impacts on this contributing heritage resource, mainly that the mass is pushed to the rear of the property away from the structure, and that there are some urban design features that lessen its impacts or overall imposing presence on the structure. And the other thing to note is that staff did do a review of the rear wing. So as mentioned, the rear wing was a utilitarian or functional structure. It didn't have ornate architectural detailing and thus wasn't determined to be a character defining element. Still, the district plan does require consideration given to the condition of any structure or its potential repair before it is removed. So staff did review this structure. Given that it didn't have character defining elements, we determined that its retention does not supersede the value associated with continuing the heritage use, which is the inn on the site for years to come. Next slide, please. So the second and final phase of staff's evaluation focused on the impacts on the contributing heritage resource or the Waverly Inn. So staff have determined that the proposal does meet the conservation standards and guidelines, which are included in attachment G of the staff report. Again, the original facade will be preserved and many of the missing features will be either restored or reinstated moving forward, which again is a benefit from a heritage point of view. So the standing seam metal roofs along the facade above the bay windows, they will be reinstated, as well as additional detailing on the breakfast nook and the rooftop structure will be reinstated as well. Again, the addition does not directly displace character defining elements because there are no character defining elements on the rear portion of the original Waverly Inn structure. It does, however, have some minor impacts on the breakfast nook as there will be an encroachment of the connector to this feature. However, when you look at the potential impacts on the breakfast nook, they are definitely offset by the overall rehabilitation efforts that are being proposed for the building. Staff also feel that the proposal is consistent with Standard 11, which requires additions or rehabilitation projects to be subordinate or secondary to the primary structure, but also feature a degree of compatibility. So staff feel that by pushing the mass away from the structure and by incorporating modern building materials, Standard 11 has been upheld. There are components of the proposal, such as using copper materials along the parking entrance here, as you can see in kind of a backwards or a C shape, that it helps kind of enhance compatibility or give a nod to, I guess, the heritage features of the site. And again, in closing, the applicant has indicated their preference to include wooden materials on the southern wall of the building. However, they do acknowledge that aluminum windows, non-combustible siding, or sprinklers may have to be introduced to this wall if the building code requires it. Next slide, please. So finally, this substantial alteration is a little different than your usual substantial alteration because they typically take direction solely from the Heritage Property Act. Within this Heritage Conservation District, there's a two-stage process that we take direction from, which means our next steps here are a little different than they normally are. So basically, the Heritage Property Act gives municipalities the ability to create heritage conservation districts and to state what projects require what's called a certificate of appropriateness from the heritage officer. This is just a piece of paper or a form that says the heritage officer believes the proposal is consistent with the intent of the heritage conservation plan and bylaw. So within the plan and bylaw themselves, they do state that substantial alterations to the heritage resource require this certificate, but it also requires a public hearing. So this application will now proceed to Regional Council for a public hearing and then a subsequent decision. So if Regional Council approves the proposal, staff will issue the certificate, and then the process of this application is complete. If Regional Council denies the request, then staff cannot issue their certificate, and then additional attempts will be made to meet that. So this is a bit more confusing, and it is a new process for the committee and staff. So if you do have any further questions on this, feel free to let us know. But basically this application today, once your recommendation is made, will lead us up to the public hearing stage of the approval process. The next slide, finally in closing, with these considerations in mind, staff recommend that the Heritage Advisory Committee recommend that Regional Council set a date to consider the proposed substantial alterations to the contributing heritage resource at 1266 Barrington Street. And then once that hearing is complete, approve the substantial alterations to the contributing heritage resource. Thank you very much for your time, and staff will do our best to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Jesse. Are there any questions from committee members? Don't see anything in the chat yet. Does anybody wish to have any questions? I had a couple, if no one has any other questions. I just want to ask about the with the removal of the rear wing and stuff. Are they going to make that part of the building wheelchair accessible for the main building floor? Is that going to be wheelchair accessible anywhere possible? And then my second question in regards to the rooftop cupola, that seems like a new feature. Was there, I don't recall seeing in the old pictures any reference to a cupola on there, but now they're proposing to put one on the building. Was staff had any comments on that additional weather vane feature?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So, excuse me, staff do know that the building, once the proposal is complete, will be wheelchair accessible. So on some of the images where you can see the Waverly Inn with the parking garage entrance, there is actually going to be a pedestrian entrance through those two structures into the back of the addition that is wheelchair accessible. The rear and front portion of the Waverly Inn, I think, will be maintained as they are. So that will be the primary point of access for people with mobility issues. The rear portion of the Waverly will be changed to some degree to meet building code, to include things like fire escapes and aluminum windows and sprinklers and whatnot in order to meet certain safety standards. But that pathway between the parking garage and the Waverly Inn will be the primary point of entrance for both any guests, both those with mobility issues and those who are relatively able-bodied.
Just to clarify, that's into the old building, not the new one.
Nope. So if you, yeah, I can, just 1 second here. If, just 1 second here. If the clerk could go to slide, let's say 7, I think you can get a better view of it there. It's also included in the attachments of your staff report if the committee members would like to take a look at that. But you can see that the Waverly Inn remains much as it is today. The original features will be preserved or maintained. There will be a new large addition to the rear, which is kind of an L shape. So the part of that addition projecting to the street will be used for cars, but there will be a pathway in between those two structures leading to the modern addition, which will have the primary entries to the inn, including wheelchair accessibility. In terms of the rooftop cupola, so you can see traces of the original rooftop structure on some of the historical photos. You can see kind of the peak of the roof. There's other documentation that shows that it was there. Rooftop features like belvederes are sometimes incorporated into Italianate structures as well. So we do know that a rooftop feature was on this building originally, though the documentation doesn't tell us precisely what it looked like at that time. So the applicant has done some research to get a sense of what those structures sometimes look like. And they have come forward with this proposal, which staff feel is fairly consistent with a historic place. However, we do know that it is not classified as a restoration because there's just not enough historical detail to say that this is exactly what it used to look like. But there is some research and and historical photographs to show that it was there and generally what its placement was like and what its roof shape was. So that's kind of what the applicant is coming up with that proposal on. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Jill. So on this image here, and there's some other PowerPoint images as well that you can use, but you can see the Waverly Inn structure in gray. Then along the southern portion of the site in orange is the new addition. And you can see that there's a walkway or space between those two structures that leads to the primary inn entrance. So the entrance along Barrington Street will be preserved and maintained as that is character defining elements. But the primary accessible entryway will be through this new entryway that is located between the Waverly Inn and the parking garage entrance.
I see Aries made a comment. Slide 5 shows a portion of the Belvedere structure. Could we go to slide 5 just to clarify?
I think it might be slide 7. So yeah, if you can see this view here, you can see the parking garage on the left. You can see the Waverly Inn on the right, and then there will be an entryway with wheelchair accessibility ramp between those two structures, leading to the overall bulk of the addition right there.
If you go back to slide 5, I think you can see just a little bit of the copula that might have been there on the building. If you go back to slide 5 for a second, it's kind of in behind the fireplaces.
Right, yeah. So you can see a bit of the roof behind that chimney there. So there are some photographs, this one included, where you can see a little bit of it, but we don't have enough documentation to say that they're restoring it. What we can say is they are reinstating a rooftop feature that is reasonably consistent with the historic period, but we can't say that that is exactly what it used to look like.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair, I'm wondering, Jesse, behind the Waverly Inn, is the developer now proposing that there will be a small open area which looks on the diagrams, on the architectural drawings, looks like a blind alley? Could you confirm that?
Go back to slide 7, I think it was. Or the other one, yeah.
Yes. Plan picture was the it's a one-story connector to the building, so we'll integrate the new addition into the contributing heritage resource, and on the top of that first story, I believe there is some pedestrian space or rooftop patio space potentially. So yeah, there's a rooftop patio area which you can kind of see there. I think that's what the committee member was asking about.
Okay, see slide 8, please.
Yes, thank you. Where the wing is being, the proposal is to remove the addition at the back, does that then become a blind alley between the existing inn and the new addition? Or is it covered over? It's unclear to me.
Could you, through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by the term blind alley.
It looks like you come in from the street, you would come into the new entrance, but it looks like perhaps at street level you can walk alongside the new entrance, turn the corner so that you are facing north, and have a blind alley in front of you between the new building and the old Waverly Inn.
Would that be more of a courtyard than a blind alley?
Perhaps
right. So
it would be better to describe it as an interior courtyard.
Right, so through you, Mr. Chair, so that part of the site is the northern property line, so the development would abut the northern property line. It looks like there's a 0 setback there. So there wouldn't be necessarily an island there, but there is a fire escape from the Waverly Inn that does transverse down to that rooftop area to allow people to get in and out of the building if there is an emergency. But there is not an alleyway, I guess, be along the northern property line because the structure is constructed to the property line.
Thank you. Blind alleys are, I think, a security concern, and that was my thinking, but it's a little difficult to see from the diagram.
Are there any pictures from the north, viewing it from the north side of the property?
Sure. So if the clerk is able, they can go to, let's see here, slide 24. There's some extra diagrams. So you can see that the fire escape goes to both the top of the entrance, and then there is also another stairway. I can't tell exactly here, that does traverse down to the back of the site as well to help people get out of the property. But yeah, in terms of an alley going from there to Barrington Street, the Waverly Inn is on the 0 property line, so there wouldn't be an alley leading to to Barrington Street.
Do we have any views from the north side of the building?
Yeah, it's on slide 24. So after the concluding or thank you slide, there's a few extra drawings in there, which you can see where the fire escape is going in a bit better detail.
Okay, now I see the connectivity on the ground floor. Okay, I see that they're there now. All right, I'm just kind of curious how they're going to remove the snow in that area. That sort of that rooftop patio kind of section there above that new connectivity areas is going to be a bit of a kind of curious about snow removal. We're going to probably have some good drainage for the roof there.
Right, and through you, Mr. Chair, I will mention that at this point in time, they do have these elevation drawings in that are quite helpful, but they're still working on the more detailed building plans and site plans that will have a bit more level of detail and may look slightly different to address some of those requirements before the permitting stage. So that's a good point about the snow clearance and snow removal.
Can I ask a question in regards to the existing color of the building now is a pale yellow and stuff, right? And I see these artist renditions of having it mauve and pink. Are those the intentions of the designer to change the color scheme of the building, and just out of curiosity?
Right, so through you, Mr. Chair. So at this point in time, they're looking at alternate colors for the inn. When it comes to paint colors, what we typically suggest is that applicants use the historical photos to act as a guide for what those colors might be. We also direct them to a heritage series of paints, which are typically compatible with buildings from historic buildings from this particular era. So right now, it looks like they are proposing to change the color of the property in line with some of those heritage series of paints. But it's possible that the color could change in the future. When it comes to a substantial alteration, paint color wouldn't necessarily be classified as a substantial alteration, and that is something that staff and the applicant can chat about further. But it wouldn't be an issue that would come before the Heritage Advisory Committee for consideration.
One last comment I have is nice to see that they put the emblem of the pineapple on the new building. You know, that's one of the characteristics of the Waverly Inn. You see their signage, they have the pineapple as a symbol of hospitality, and I'm glad to see that on the new hotel or apartment building structure, they also have the pineapple on the building facade. So it's very nice to see that.
Yeah, and just building on that point, as part of the site plan approval application, we've had a lot of back and forth with the applicant on why they chose the design that they did. And another part of the reason for having the pineapple there is I guess there's actually a pineapple motif embedded in the floorboards of the inn. So that was a way that the applicant thought through some of the urban design guidelines associated with the site plan approval process that they could provide some historical connectivity between the property's interior and the exterior. So that's just an aside about the pineapple as well.
Are there any further comments or questions from committee?
Mr. Chair, it's Cassandra. I have a question and comment for Jesse, please.
Okay, before we do that, I see Patrick wrote in the chat line, since he doesn't have audio connection. I appreciate the continuity of the copper cladding provides between the old and new. Are these confirmed for the final plans or just conceptual?
Sorry, just 1 second here. I'm going to read the comments in detail. But so the historical research and documentations show that the front bay windows originally had standing seam metal roofs. And it does appear that the rooftop cupola may have had copper materials as well. So that is something that they are hoping to reinstate on the front facade of the Waverly Inn, and also introduce into the cupola as kind of a reflecting some of the historic materials that were originally on the inn but are no longer present. So that's kind of an effort they're taking to reinstate them. There's also some copper materials, as I mentioned previously, along the new structures, parking entrance, to kind of provide some historical compatibility in terms of building material usage as well.
Okay. Who was that I cut off? Was it Cassandra, was it? Or who was it I cut off?
Yeah, it was Cassandra.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Jesse, I know that we're only supposed to really comment on the integration of the historical and the new in terms of maintaining the historical aspects. But I am concerned about the number of parking spots relative to the number of suites, 38 to 114 or whatever the numbers were. And just wondering if, just thinking about 80 people not having a parking spot, 80 visitors not having a parking spot there, maybe having driven in or having a rental car and needing to find on-street parking. And does that have an impact on the neighborhood cultural heritage?
Right, so through you, Mr. Chair, so features such as on-site parking or indoor parking are not something that's subject to the Heritage Advisory Committee's review through a substantial alteration request. So that is a feature of the application that's been discussed during the concurrent site plan approval application. So that's kind of beyond the scope of today's discussion here at the Heritage Advisory Committee. But I can tell you that basically what was shown in this image today is what staff have been working with the applicant on, and I believe that as of right, they don't need any parking. But the amount of parking that they're providing, in addition to the exterior design of the building, is something that is supportive through the design manual guidelines that we're looking at through the concurrent application. But parking isn't something that should factor into your decision today. The criteria that you should be using to assess the substantial alteration requests are the proposal's overall impacts on the districts, the impacts on the Waverly's character defining elements, and if the proposal is consistent with the heritage standards and guidelines. So hopefully that was helpful.
Yes, thanks, Jesse.
Thank you very much, Cassandra. Good pick up there on the parking matters. It's always an issue. I see Luke has his hand up. Go ahead, Luke.
Thank you. Yeah, I have another question for Jesse and the staff as well. It's really just so I can kind of understand the decision process regarding the rear addition, the rear L, and the kind of potential implications for other properties in the district. And from what you presented, it seems like the decision to allow the removal of the L was sort of largely on a cost-benefit analysis basis. I know that the Conservation District Plan allows for the removal of rear additions that are judged not to be of historical significance. But the staff report we received indicated that the rear wing is considered to be of historic significance, primarily due to its past uses in accommodation, and presumably because the construction of that rear wing seems to coincide with the time that the property began to be used as an inn. So it seemed to me that, so does this mean that, a rear addition that has historical significance can be removed or demolished, provided it doesn't have, significant aesthetic value in terms of character defining elements, and that there are kind of positive trade-offs with the rest of the development? Is that the case?
So thanks for the question, through you, Mr. Chair. So I wouldn't say our assessment was due to cost benefits in terms of economics at all. So as you mentioned, that the HCD plan and bylaw do allow for the removal or partial removal of structures subject to a staff review process. So what the plan and the bylaw are really set up to do are to preserve the character defining elements of the district and also the elements of this property. So the district really sets the stage for what features are character defining elements, and it really focuses in on the area's transition from Georgian to Victorian architecture. So the built form of those architectural styles and their architectural detailing and their shape and design, those are the character defining elements. So when this rear wing was constructed, it wasn't constructed according to a Georgian or Victorian architectural style. It was constructed for functional purposes, to expand the historic hotel use. So in a sense, what they did back in the late 1800s are what the new owner is requesting to do now. So they're asking to extend the historic use of the inn, and by doing that, they feel like it is best served to get rid of the historic wing that was added a while back. So in looking through staff's review, we looked at that ring and did some research on it, and we determined that it isn't a character defining element because it isn't consistent with what's listed in the Heritage Conservation District for those important defining elements. We also know that the applicant did explore options to either preserve it or to rehabilitate it and continue it moving forward. But doing that, they did run into some building code issues in terms of trying to expand or repurpose that to meet modern building code standards. So given that the two options would have been preserve a feature that isn't a character defining element and run into a lot of national building code issues, or preserve the historic use, which is the inn, staff defaulted to the overall benefits of preserving the use are more important than preserving a feature, which isn't a character defining element. So that's really how staff came to that decision. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Jesse. That helps us. That's really what I was looking for. And just to clarify, I did mean kind of cost benefit analysis in terms of like the heritage value.
Okay.
I'm suggesting that staff are making a decision based on economics.
Yeah.
Sorry about that confusion. Thank you for your answer.
Are there any further comments or questions from committee members? Second time.
It's Jennifer. I just want to make the comment that I think it looks really good. I really I think the way they've integrated the building in the back and what they're doing to the front, it really comes together nicely. And I don't always like these, but I really do like the look of this one.
Thank you, Jen. Is there any comment with that? Any further comments from anyone?
I would just concur with that last comment. I think that often we see these and they feel somewhat detached from the original historic property. I appreciate that it looks like the owners and the developers in this case are kind of going to lengths to try to work with the existing property. So I appreciate those efforts.
All right, no further comments. So then I'll Ask for a motion to put the motion on the floor, please. We didn't put it on the floor yet, so if someone like to move the motion, please, for the record.
It's Cassandra. I can read the
Go ahead.
recommendation. Yep.
Go ahead then.
It is recommended that the Heritage Advisory Committee recommend that Regional Council, 1, set a public hearing date to consider the proposed substantial alterations to the contributing heritage resource at 1266 Barrington Street, Halifax, known as the Waverly Inn, as proposed in this report and its attachments, in accordance with bylaw H 800, the Old South Suburb Heritage Conservation District bylaw, and 2, approve the substantial alterations to the contributing heritage resource at 1266 Barrington Street, Halifax, the Waverly Inn, as proposed in this report and its attachments, in accordance with bylaw H 800, the Old South Suburb Heritage Conservation District bylaw.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Stoddard. Just a clerical notation that in the agenda it states the date of the report of January 14th, 2022. Just want to make sure that's concurred. All right. The motion is on the floor and duly seconded. Any further questions or debate on the motion? Seeing none, I'll ask for those in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? I see Patrick's also said aye in the chat line, so it appears we have unanimous consent to that as well. Thank you very much. All right, so do we have any members of committee requests? Any motions? None filed and no added items. The date of our next meeting is February 23rd, 2022. I'll entertain a motion for Aaron. I see your hands up. Sorry. Go ahead, sir.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, and thank you, and hope thank you for the members of the committee that are going to be leaving us soon. I just wanted to mention one important thing, and that's that Jesse has, unfortunately for us, but fortunately for him, taken a new position with our Parks and Recreation Department. He's been with us now for 2.5 years and done some amazing work for us on the Heritage team. So I just wanted to mention that to he may be back with us for one more meeting, depending on what files he's able to take with him. But I just wanted to mention that so that the committee could give him a proper send-off.
We're gonna miss you, Jesse.
Oh, thank you.
Congratulations on your new position, though.
Oh, thanks.
Congratulations on your new appointment.
Congratulations, Jesse.
Congratulations.
Okay, thank you. I may still be back occasionally because I'll be working on some cultural heritage projects rather than built heritage. So I may be back at some point, who knows? So
Awesome.
Also, as Aaron had mentioned, I'd like to thank all those members of the committee that their terms are about to expire. I'm not sure when the recommendations are coming forward for the new appointments and stuff or reappointments. So I'd like to thank everyone for their service and appreciate your contributions to this committee. It's very important work that our Halifax region is one of the most historical municipalities in the country, and I'm glad this is the work of this committee to try to preserve some of that and have it documented. So hearing no further comment, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
I move to adjourn. Sandra?
Thank you. It's at 4:50. The motion for adjournment is in order. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye.